Yes, our speaker tonight is Grant Sizemore from the American Bird Conservancy, and I just love the title that he has. And let me get it right. It's the Director of Invasive Species Programs. And when you think about it, I suppose indoor cats, outdoors are invasive species. So I thought that was very clever. Anyway, Grant is um, going to talk to us about the threat of outdoor cats. And he has a degree in zoology as well as wildlife ecology and conservation from the University of Florida. And that's about all I've got. So let's turn it over to Grant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If you can't hear me, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to assume you can. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. As was mentioned before, I was supposed to present back in February and unfortunately got really sick and just could not do it. So I apologize I canceled really late on Spokane Audubon Society and appreciate the invitation to come back. Um, so yeah, we're going to talk about cats today. A fun topic for everyone, of course, I'm sure. One of my favorite topics. And this is an issue which really boils down to there are just far too many cats for the number of homes that want them. So what are we going to do with the excess number of cats? How are we going to reduce the number of cats and reduce the harms that they might have in the environment? So today we're going to talk about some of the conservation and public health underpinnings, the science, the evidence that suggests there is a crisis going on with cats in the environment and understand what some of those solutions are to tackling this issue. And I hope by the end of this, all of you can become advocates for keeping either your own cats or cats in your community indoors, because it is, after all, better for cats, better for birds, and better for people. So I real quickly want to introduce American Bird Conservancy. I think it's important to know where your information is coming from. So for those of you who don't know American Bird Conservancy, or ABC, it is a 501c3 dedicated to the conservation of native birds and their habitats throughout the Americas. So we really do work on the full annual life cycle of birds, both in the summer grounds and the wintering grounds. We preserve habitat. We manage habitats. We also work on a variety of threats that face birds. And we are a membership organization. You can become a member if you want to keep up with what we've got going on. You can probably sign up for our information without becoming a member also, though obviously membership helps. Um, and you are probably aware of this study. So in 2019, Rosenberg et al. Published a groundbreaking study which found that we have lost about 3 billion birds in the United States and Canada in the last 50 years. So basically all groups of birds, all taxa, are declining, and quite precipitously, except for water birds. Water birds seem to be doing pretty well. A coalition, the 3 Billion Birds Coalition, put together 7 simple actions to help birds, which you can see listed here. And of course, among them is keeping cats indoors, which we will get into in just a bit. But I do want to mention that American Bird Conservancy is working on a whole variety of other topics addressing threats and protecting habitats associated with birds. Some of those include like our work with glass collisions, educating homeowners and architects about bird-safe windows, our work in Hawaii on birds, not mosquitoes, to protect Hawaiian honey creepers from avian malaria spread by invasive mosquitoes. Our SPLASH program, which helps to protect coastal environments for shorebirds from plastic and other types of litter along the coastlines. And again, habitat management for species like golden-winged warblers that require that early successional habitat. So let's get into the cats topic. If I can leave you with just kind of one message today, I guess it's that domestic cats can make wonderful pets. I have a cat myself, but they cause significant harm to birds and other wildlife when they roam outside. And so domestic cat management is essential. And so American Bird Conservancy realized this many years ago and started the Cats Indoors program, which is dedicated essentially to the to responsible cat ownership and effective management of unowned cats. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page regarding the terminology associated with cats. All these terms kind of get thrown around and don't always mean the same thing in different contexts. So I want to make sure we're on the same page here. So when I say domestic cat, that is really the common name for the species. It has nothing to do with the behavioral traits of that individual animal. It is Felis catus, is a domestic cat. And then there are all these behavioral associations or terminologies associated with domestic cats. Free ranging, any cat that has access to the outdoors that is not contained in some way, also called free roaming or at large. Stray cat is a cat that's often habituated to people but is running at large, which is free ranging, free roaming. And then a feral cat is a free ranging cat that is generally not habituated to people. And so let's set the stage here a little bit with domestic cats. They were first domesticated about 10,000 years ago in what's called the Near East, essentially the Middle East, North Africa. And you can see that area in the orangish color here on the map on the right. Their closest wild relative is the Near Eastern wildcat pictured here. But they are a distinct species at this point, domesticated in consult with people. And since their domestication, they have been spread around the world. This map shows the presence of domestic cats on islands. Of course, they are on all the continents except Antarctica as well. But they are truly a global species at this point due to their close affiliation with people. And they are an instinctive predator. I'm sure anybody who's ever spent any time around a cat understands this. If you've ever played with a cat with a feather toy or a laser pointer or a ball of strings, or the classic example, you have witnessed that instinctive predatory response. We call it play, and certainly it is. It's enrichment. It's stimulating for the cat. It's good for their mental well-being, their physical well-being, but it is a predatory response. And so when that cat is attacking that feather toy or that laser pointer or whatever, it has no intention of eating that toy. Of course, cats are not dumb. But that same exact play behavior, that same instinctive prey drive, when it occurs outside the house with birds or other wildlife, suddenly that becomes lethal for birds and wildlife. So we have to be mindful of the consequences of the introductions of domestic cats to environments around the world. And we have to also be aware that domestic cats are not native to North America. As I mentioned, they're domesticated in the Near East. They're a domestic species, so technically they're not native anywhere. But if you were to make a claim for them to be native somewhere, it would be the Middle East and North Africa. They have also an advantage over wild predators because of their close affiliation with people. So domestic cats, unlike native predators, wild predators, have access to veterinary care. They have access to plentiful food, clean water. They have shelter. I mean, all these things which are really luxuries that wild animals would probably love to have, but do not have. And so if a domestic cat, when roaming outdoors, doesn't make a kill, it doesn't go hungry, it goes home. And this is a real advantage over native predators, which leads to a disproportionate impact that domestic cats can have in the environment as opposed to native predators. There have been some interesting studies on predation pressure caused by domestic cats around the world. One of them is the Kitty Cam study published in 2013 out of the University of Georgia. And these images on the left are taken from that study. They put some video monitoring devices, some cameras around collars on owned domestic cats that had access to the outdoors. They were fed plenty of food. They monitored what they got up to in outdoors, and surprise, surprise, they killed birds and other wildlife. So that wasn't particularly shocking. But what was interesting was that they only returned about 23% of all prey to the home. And so what that meant was all of the previous studies that had relied on prey returns to estimate total cat-caused wildlife mortality, or all of the individuals who own cats and say, well, my cat, it kills maybe a bird a month, no big deal. You actually have to multiply those findings or that observation by the cat owner by about 4 or 5 to get the actual uh, total impact of that cat roaming in the local environment. We've also seen out of research from North Carolina State University that domestic cats, in a similar study where they monitored what they were getting up to, that domestic cats have 2 to 10 times a greater predation impact in the local environment as opposed to similarly sized wild predators. They compared domestic cats to the jungle cat. And that was in part because domestic cats are so good at killing wildlife, but also because they exist at such high densities, much higher than native predators. And so the takeaway message here really is that owned domestic cats still kill wildlife and still kill lots of wildlife. Now, I also want to point out that, we've often talked about domestic cats or other pet species as individuals, but certainly, birds, as I'm sure you guys know, are individuals as well. Other wildlife are individuals. These are populations composed of individuals. And while frequently in wildlife management or ecological research, we think about only population levels, individuals are having their own unique experiences, and we should be mindful of those. And these, golden crowned kinglet and hermit thrush in these two images on the far left, these individuals are being decimated by domestic cats roaming in the environment. And even when cats have, or even when birds or other wildlife have the opportunity to be taken to a wildlife rehabilitation facility, are given a chance at a long life or rehabilitation with professional veterinary care, about 80% of all birds ultimately die from their wounds caused by a domestic cat. And that's in part because the cat teeth are, they are very sharp. They puncture down through tissues. Cats have bacteria in their mouths. And so they might suffer trauma, but then it ultimately might die from infection as a result of that bacteria puncturing down into the tissues and infecting that individual. Research has shown that domestic cats can impact about 300 species. 300 different species have been identified at wildlife rehab facilities in the United States that have been injured by domestic cats roaming in the environment. But we also know that domestic cats really will consume a wide variety of species. A research study that was published either this year or early last year by Lepchik et al. Found there were over 2,000 species globally that were consumed by domestic cats. So it not only domestic cats roaming the environment not only impacts individuals, but it also can impact a whole lot of individuals, which can have cascading effects, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But I want to share with you the research on the total direct sources of anthropogenic or human-caused mortality to birds in the United States and Canada. This is taken from Loss et al. 2015. And you can see that cats are number one there on the far left. 2.4 billion birds killed by domestic cats in the United States and a little over 200 million killed per year in Canada. But I want to point out that this is on a log scale. And so to really give you an idea of the comparison between these various impacts, let's change it to not log transformed and show the disparity between domestic cat impacts and all of the other direct sources of human-caused bird mortality. It's not even close. And I don't say this to in any way to say that we should not be focusing on window collisions. We should, or automobiles, or any of these other direct sources of human-caused bird mortality. We definitely should, and American Bird Conservancy does work on those issues. But we cannot simply ignore the impacts of domestic cats in the environment. The magnitude of their predation pressure on wildlife is just too great. And this is only looking at birds. It doesn't even include mammals, reptiles, amphibians, which are also impacted. And the research in the United States, excuse me, United States and Canada, um, is consistent with research that has been done all across the globe. So you can see the results of that research here. It's been done in at the nationwide level. This research has been done in Canada, the US, China, and Australia. And the results are that for individual taxa, domestic cats kill hundreds of millions to billions of individuals in those taxa every single year. It's a lot of animals that are killed by cats, unnecessarily, I might add. And so the magnitude of this impact really adds up. It has resulted in population level declines, and up to and including species extinctions. So cats have actually contributed to the extinction of 63 species of birds, mammals, and reptiles around the world. They account for 26% of all bird, mammal, and reptile species extinctions in the modern era. And because of all of this, all the reasons that we've talked about thus far, cats are considered to be among the world's most harmful invasive species. And I know that is kind of a different way of thinking about cats. We often think of them as just cute, cuddly pets, and they certainly are. But as soon as they start roaming outdoors, they function as an introduced predator. And because of the seriousness of the impacts that they have in the environment, they are very clearly an invasive species. But so cats can have such a tremendous impact, a swift impact on local wildlife, especially birds. I think one of the best examples of this is with the Stevens Island wren or Lyle's wren, which is a species that in the 1890s was unknown to Western science. It was discovered when a lighthouse keeper moved to this island in New Zealand. He brought with him his cat, and one day it brought home an individual, the Stevens Island wren, in its mouth. The lighthouse keeper knew birds fairly well. He didn't recognize the species, sent it off to a museum. They identified it as a new species. They named it the Stevens Island wren, and within 2 years, it was completely wiped off the face of the earth by cats. So, I mean, this predation pressure can happen very quickly with irreversible declines for birds or other wildlife. In addition to that, we can also see altered community makeup, and modified ecosystem dynamics in ecosystems where domestic cats have been introduced. So, for example, in this Hawkins et al. 2004, the graph on the left, we see that in areas with domestic cats present, they made comparisons in the communities of wildlife where domestic cats were and were not present. This was in California, I believe. They found that without domestic cats, there were more birds, more native rodents, and fewer non-native rodents. And then, of course, the inverse, where cats were present, fewer birds, fewer native rodents, and more non-native rodents. Similarly, there was a trophic cascade identified in fragmented habitats. This was definitely in California, this Crooks and Soule 1999, the image of the coyote, the domestic cat, and the bird. And what they found was that in those fragmented habitats where domestic cats were present, that there were fewer birds, and in fact, ground nesting birds were entirely extirpated. They were eradicated. But in habitats that were large enough to hold coyotes, where coyotes were present, there were fewer domestic cats present, because coyotes will eat domestic cats, and there were still ground nesting birds existing in those habitats. So there's this confluence, I guess, of domestic cats as a predator, but also as prey, potentially for another species, and an impact or an influence of habitat size, which is especially important in our increasingly fragmented world. Similarly, indirect impacts of domestic cats in the environment have been identified in this study on the top right as fearing the feline. Bonington et al. Found that the mere presence of a domestic cat in the environment was enough to significantly reduce the amount of food fed to chicks in the nest by about 1/3 and increase the likelihood of nest predation by another predator by an order of magnitude, in part because these they use common blackbirds in the UK. These adult blackbirds had to engage in anti-predatory behaviors. They used a stuffed cat as their uh, example of a domestic cat. So obviously it was not going to kill any birds, but the birds didn't know that. And so they had to engage in this anti-predatory response, which meant that they couldn't be flying around finding caterpillars or whatever to feed their young. And it notified other predators that there was a nest nearby, which increased the likelihood of nest failure as a result of predation. So in review here, we've talked about domestic cats as an introduced predator. They are an introduced species to North America, and of course, a significant predator that can negatively affect birds and other wildlife populations up to the point of species extinctions. So here on out, we're gonna transition a little bit from direct predator to some other indirect impacts that cats can have in the environment, and that's going to be disease transmission. So there are a lot of parasites and diseases that domestic cats can carry and transmit to other species, whether that be other felids or other wildlife or people. And so this table shows some of those parasites and diseases that cats can transmit. We're not going to talk about all of those, of course, but I do want to focus on two of these in a little bit more detail. So one of these is rabies. Domestic cats are the top source of rabies among domestic animals in the United States. They outpace dogs by 4-1, have been the top source since the 1980s because we got serious about dog control. And so dog rabies declined precipitously. And now cats are the primary source of rabies among domestic animals. They also have a disproportionate risk, pose a disproportionate risk for human exposure to rabies as opposed to wildlife. So wildlife are far more likely, or there are far more wild animals that test positive for rabies annually than domestic cats, but domestic cats are far more likely to expose people to the disease, in part because you're not so much likely to, try and pet a skunk or a raccoon, I hope. But an unknown cat, you might say, okay, let's pet that thing. You have no idea what the uh, rabies vaccination history is or its exposure history is. You just think there's a cute cat, I'll try and pet it, and can unknowingly become exposed to rabies. So rabies in domestic cats is a strain on public health resources. It requires monitoring and post-exposure prophylaxis administration. I think it's important to point out that rabies is fatal once symptoms arise. So, once you know you have it, you're probably going to die, almost 100% certainty. So we really want to be diligent about prevention. We want to make sure that if there is an exposure potential, then we provide that post-exposure prophylaxis and limit any exposures that might occur. So as you can see from the map, Washington is not a hotspot for cat rabies. I think there have only been 2 since 2001. Bats have been the major source of rabies in Washington state, but along the eastern seaboard, Texas, there are some areas throughout the United States where rabies remains a big concern, and of course, domestic cats nationwide are the leader of rabies in carrying rabies among domestic animals. So I know many people will say, when it comes to, I made that comment about dog control. We got serious about dog control, and we saw a decline in dog rabies. Many people say, "Well, I'm afraid of dogs." They're scarier. They're more imposing and threatening when they're running at large. Cats are not. And yeah, I get that to some extent, but I do want to share with you this video, which I hope will work, of a rabid cat in Virginia.
Chesapeake health officials are looking for people who may have come into contact with a rabid cat.
They're worried for your safety. The cat roamed the streets for more than a week, and if you were bitten, it could be deadly. 10 on your sides, Deanna LeBlanc shows us why time is of the essence.
Yeah, Anita and Tom, the health department says this cat was likely rabid from April 10th through April 19th. That means the clock for treatment is ticking because you must be treated within 30 days. Now the health department is aggressively trying to find anyone who may have come into contact with this cat. Pink flyers lining the streets and storefronts in the Compostela Crossing section of Chesapeake carry a serious warning. A rabid cat attacked several people who are now at risk.
The cat was not acting normally. It was attacking people. It was jumping at the window. It had a broken leg and was not nursing the broken leg that much.
It jumped right here and bit him right here on the side.
Charles Mason says the black and white cat attacked a customer last Monday as he tried to leave Mason's convenience store. His surveillance cameras caught it on video.
It came to the door. As soon as the customer opened the door, it jumped on him, and it either bit him or scratched him because he knocked him off, knocked him down.
That man got treatment, but health officials say the cat roamed near the Family Dollar on Compostela for days, scratching and jumping on several people. Now the health department is trying to find them.
These people are not coming forward because I think that they think the same thing you think, that, oh, once symptoms start, I'll just go to the doctor. Not with this.
If not treated in 30 days, rabies is fatal, and once symptoms start, Engel says it's too late. Now they're going door to door, visiting soup kitchens, even using this electronic sign, hoping to help people before it's too late.
Call us and we will work out transportation. We'll work out whatever we have to do to get them in there for the series of 4. We will work with them. We need them to come in so we don't lose them.
Now, the cat was caught and euthanized last week, but again, it was roaming that area, Compostela and Border Road, between April 10th and April 19th. If you have any questions about
Chesapeake health officials are looking for Chesapeake health officials are.
Okay, so you get the idea. You know, it can be quite serious when domestic cats have rabies. So we want to be cognizant of that very serious risk. And, you know, I think when we're talking about domestic cat management, which is essential, which is the point I made at the beginning, we want to make sure that we are taking steps to reduce human exposure risks and domestic cat exposure risks to rabies to prevent, you know, ongoing harms and transmission, especially to people. So moving on, toxoplasmosis. So Toxoplasma gondii. Toxoplasmosis is caused by a parasite called Toxoplasma gondii. It's a little protozoan parasite which relies on felines to complete its life cycle. It can only sexually reproduce in the gut of a feline. So that's a domestic cat, you know, a mountain lion, whatever. It doesn't have to be just a domestic cat, but it also includes domestic cats. Absolutely. A single domestic cat can excrete up to hundreds of millions of tiny infectious oocysts. So these are the egg stage, basically, of Toxoplasma gondii. They're excreted in feces by a domestic cat where they can persist in the environment for months to years, whether that be in terrestrial, marine, or freshwater systems. Just one oocyst is enough, if it's accidentally ingested or inhaled, is enough to cause toxoplasmosis in any bird or mammal, any warm-blooded species. And Toxoplasma gondii can move through the environment and infect a wide variety of species along the way. So I'm going to get into a little bit more of that here in just a bit. One thing I do want to point out, though, is so toxoplasmosis is really fascinating, I think. And one of the reasons it's so fascinating is not only this, you know, mandatory life cycle associated with domestic cats, but it's in order to accommodate that, it has become a zombie parasite. It can modify the behavior of its host. And so this was first identified by Burdoy et al. In 2000 when they conducted a study to see if there was a difference in the response of rats that were infected with toxoplasmosis and rats that were not infected with toxoplasmosis. And what they found was a significant difference in the amount of time that rats infected with toxoplasmosis chose to spend in an area that was inhabited by cats. And so what this meant was that rats that were infected with toxo chose to spend more time in an area inhabited by cats, thus increasing the likelihood that they would encounter a cat, be depredated by a cat, and then complete the life cycle of Toxoplasma gondii. So it can modify the host behavior to increase its likelihood of completing its life cycle. It's super fascinating. Now, those same sort of behavioral changes can also occur in other species, not just rats or other rodents. And these might be species that are not necessarily expected to become prey items for domestic cats or other felids, species like humans. So we know that humans do get toxoplasmosis. Probably, if you've heard of it, it's from an OBGYN who said, don't change cat litter while you're pregnant. They typically don't tell you why. The reason is because of Toxoplasma gondii, because if you do, it can cause really serious impacts for the fetus. It can lead to fetal abnormalities. It can cause miscarriages. Toxoplasma gondii infection in people can cause blindness, deafness, memory loss, organ failure. Ocular toxoplasmosis is a big problem, up to and including death, especially for those with compromised immune systems. There are also, as I mentioned, these modifications of behavior or changes in our neurology. So there are associations with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. They are not causative. They are an association. So it's not clear which came first, the chicken or the egg sort of thing. But the association is definitely there. Now, there has been a lot of research on Toxoplasma gondii. It's super fascinating, as I said, but we do know, I mean, one of the takeaway messages here is we do know it is a serious public health problem. If we get it, especially at the wrong time, we are at risk. Now, many people may get it and actually have no idea that they get it. So it may be as simple as flu-like symptoms, if that's simple. But then, of course, there are all kinds of other harmful outcomes as a result of Toxoplasma gondii infection. And I think one of the things to consider, again, is because domestic cats are a carrier, in fact, the primary carrier in the United States, there are so many more domestic cats than there are wild felids. We have to be aware of where domestic cats are roaming, if they are indeed roaming outdoors. And so there was an interesting study in 2018 in Virginia, which found that 82% of cats that were trapped in Richmond City were within roaming distance of public elementary or preschool grounds, public parks, or community gardens. These are places with at-risk populations, human populations, whether they be old and have compromised immune systems, or be young and be more likely to put their fingers in their mouths after playing in a sandbox or the dirt or, you know, loose soil, whatever. I mean, these are likely hotspots of human infection, and it can have life-changing alterations as a result of that infection. So something else I want to point out is the impacts of Toxoplasma gondii in our agricultural process. So toxoplasmosis is already known to be the second leading cause of death among foodborne illnesses in the United States. It's recognized by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to be among the top 5 neglected parasitic diseases in the United States. This isn't something that we just haven't known about for a little while. But it has been largely overlooked, hence the neglected parasitic diseases category. We know that Toxoplasma gondii can infect virtually any warm-blooded species. It absolutely does impact livestock. And then those livestock, not only are they themselves at risk, but also put people at risk also. So if we were to consume the infected tissues, the meat of one of those individual, whether it be a pig or a goat or a sheep or whatever, then we could become infected with toxoplasmosis as well. There have been a bunch of studies on this. One interesting one is from Chalkowski et al., I think from 2020 maybe. They looked at, they used chickens, feral chickens, as an indicator species of total environmental contamination with Toxoplasma gondii. And what they found was that virtually chickens from the entire island were infected with Toxoplasma gondii. So we know chickens absolutely get it, but really the takeaway from that message was widespread environmental contamination as a result of domestic cats. There are no other felines in Hawaii, so that's definitely from domestic cats. We know this also has an economic impact for livestock producers, and even in the agricultural system where we're not talking about livestock, but just produce. There has been research that has found that there is contaminated produce as a result of domestic cats roaming in the environment, defecating in the environment, and then the oocysts remaining on the leaves or body of the fruiting body, like a pepper or whatever, and then presenting a human exposure risk as well. And that was some work done by Lilly and Webster. They found that samples from both organic and conventionally grown produce, as well as from retail, like supermarkets and farmers markets, tested positive. Not all of them, of course, but samples from each of those categories did test positive. So we need to be washing our fruits and vegetables before we eat them, but also aware of the need for biosecurity with regard to our agricultural system. So wildlife are also not immune to the impacts of Toxoplasma gondii as transmitted by domestic cats. I mentioned I would get back to the sort of the movement of toxo in the environment, and you can see that here on the bottom left. So this is work that was done in California, and what they found was that Toxoplasma gondii excreted in the feces of felines, including domestic cats, bobcats, and mountain lions, would move through the watershed when there were rainfall events. It would move through the terrestrial environment into the nearshore and marine environment, be captured on the biofilm of kelp in that environment, then accumulated in the bodies of marine snails, and then ingested incidentally by sea otters who were consuming those snails, infecting those sea otters, killing some of them, modifying their behavior, and others. It's been found that sea otters infected with Toxoplasma gondii are significantly more likely to be killed by sharks, probably because it modifies your risk perception, which has been seen in people as well. So again, this is an example of environmental contamination with Toxoplasma gondii, which can move through an ecosystem and infect a wide variety of species. White-tailed deer have been identified as testing positive. There was a study in northern Ohio that found about 60% of white-tailed deer in one area were positive for Toxoplasma gondii infection, which is bad for deer, but also, again, a risk for human exposure if you were to harvest one of those deer and consume the tissues of that deer without having properly killed the tissue cysts of Toxoplasma gondii. And then lastly, again, we know domestic cats are a major source of toxo in the environment. Again, this comes from Hawaii, where, again, there are no other felines present, so all toxo in that environment comes from domestic cats. It is a major conservation threat for Hawaiian endangered muck seals, which, for which Toxoplasma gondii or toxoplasmosis is the leading disease threat for that species. So anyway, all this boils down to Toxoplasma gondii is a risk for a wide variety of species. Domestic cats are a primary carrier of Toxoplasma gondii and are a contributor to widespread environmental contamination, and we probably need to be taking some serious looks at how to manage that risk. So, in review, cats are a serious risk when it comes to rabies. This is a little more geographically isolated, but with Toxoplasma gondii, there is widespread contamination, and that is not geographically isolated. In fact, it is very widely distributed as a result of domestic cats defecating in the environment. So, getting back to my thesis here, I guess, cats can make wonderful pets. Like I said, I do have a cat myself, but because of the harms that they can cause in the environment when roaming outdoors, management of those domestic cats is absolutely essential.
It's an extremely daunting issue to have free-roaming cats in the wild, and when we know that they predate upon our native wildlife. In terms of solutions, I think the biggest option that we have for society is to recognize that domestic cats are not native to North America in particular, and they don't belong in the environment. And so they are wonderful house pets. I have cats myself and love them dearly. However, my cats are indoors.
Our job as human stewards should be to take as best care of those under our protection as we can, and letting them roam free in unprotected areas isn't fair to them or the areas that they're roaming. I am a cat owner. I have 2 cats. They only go outside if I am within 3 feet of them.
You know, it really boils down to just treating cats like dogs. We don't allow dogs to run around our parks and neighborhoods, and it's inappropriate for cats as well.
Yeah, I probably should set that up a little bit and let you know this is a part of a short film that ABC produced several years ago, working with wildlife rehabilitation facilities in the greater DC area. And so those were some interviews with a veterinarian at the Wildlife Center of Virginia and a rehabber at Second Chance Wildlife in Maryland. And as you can hear, you know, they're really in the trenches, understanding, seeing the impacts that cats have in the environment, and understanding the need to manage domestic cats, not only for the health and welfare of wildlife, but also for the health and welfare of domestic cats. And so it touched a little bit on solutions there. And so I want to dive into those a little bit more. So what are the management recommendations? I mean, I've been saying that management is essential. What are those management recommendations? And so I think part of it is we have to turn off the tap. We have far too many domestic cats than we have homes for. We need to make sure that no domestic cats are accidentally breeding and becoming stray or feral. We have to make sure that we are responsible cat owners and minimize the harm or eliminate the harm that those domestic cats have on birds and other wildlife. So there are a variety of ways that we can do that. All of these are supported by the American Veterinary Medical Association, who does recommend that domestic cats remain indoors, not only for the health and welfare of the ecosystem, but also for cats themselves. But it's keeping cats indoors. It's walking them on a leash if you want to take them outside. If you, again, some other responsible solutions for outdoor time are a catio or an enclosed cat patio, a stroller like you can see with Louie here. But it includes permanent identification like a microchip, updated vaccinations, licensing potentially if that's required by your jurisdiction, and sterilization unless you purposely intend to breed that domestic cat. And then for unowned cats, we have to ask ourselves, for any management strategy that we should implement, are those domestic cats still roaming outdoors? Because if they are, they're going to continue to have impacts in the environment, whether they're sterilized or not, they're vaccinated or not, they are still introduced predators in those ecosystems. And so we have to be mindful of that. And it really all boils down to that one fact. It's time to treat cats like we treat dogs. We've been successful mostly with dog control, in part because we have required them to be contained, to be on a leash, to be responsibly owned. And we have not done that for some reason with domestic cats. And I think it's time that we take a hard look at it and start implementing those strategies. So with regard to unowned cats in the environment, American Bird Conservancy's solution is really to trap those cats and then provide them where appropriate for adoption, place them in long-term holding facilities like a sanctuary, or euthanize those cats, but never under any circumstances re-abandon those cats back into the environment. Now, I mentioned that allowing domestic cats to roam in the environment is also harmful for cats themselves. Here is an example of that pictured. You can see this cat that's been killed by a coyote. This is not uncommon behavior for coyotes. And we're going to try and play this. I don't know if it's going to work. We'll see. If it doesn't, the still image does give you basically the idea of what's going on. No, it does not play. Okay. Well, we were having some problems with that in advance. Oh, well. So the idea here is what this video shows, it's taken from California. It shows a coyote coming up on somebody's back porch or front porch, I don't know, and attacking this pet cat, which has been allowed to roam outdoors. I can tell you in this video, the coyote does not kill the cat. It ends up climbing the banister that you see on the far right. But I mean, they go at it for a little bit, and the coyote goes off hungry, and the cat gets away. But it's indicative of the broader risk to domestic cats when they roam outside, not just from coyotes, but from a whole variety of other risks that are out there, such as parasites. Cats are about 3 times more likely to be infected with parasites when they are roaming outdoors. They're also subject to being hit by cars. I mean, how many times do you see cats lying dead on the side of the highway? And for so many cat owners who let their cats wander outside, what gets me is they kind of open the door and say, well, I hope you come back. But if it doesn't, they have no idea. Is it lost? Is it dead? I mean, what is the mentality here? Because that cat is very much at risk. They live longer, healthier lives when they are kept indoors or allowed to go outdoors responsibly, such as on a leash or in a catio. It's also important for disease control that we effectively and appropriately manage domestic cats by keeping them out of the environment. This is consistent with recommendations from the National Association of State Public Health Veterinarians, which publishes a compendium of animal rabies prevention and control. I know that is a long phrase there, but essentially it's the gold standard for rabies control in the United States. And what they say is that all dogs, cats, and ferrets should be vaccinated against rabies and revaccinated in accordance with recommendations in the compendium, which means an initial shot, a follow-up shot after 1 year, and then a booster every 1 to 3 years. Also, they say stray dogs, cats, and ferrets should be removed from the environment. Now, with regard to Toxoplasma gondii or toxoplasmosis, I think how we manage domestic cats is evident or is obviously going to have an impact on transmission risks and contamination risks with Toxoplasma gondii. Aguirre et al. Said management policies that remove cats from ecosystems reduce environmental transmission risks of Toxoplasma gondii by eliminating the interaction of definitive, that'd be felids, and intermediate hosts, all other warm-blooded species. Conversely, policies that intentionally maintain domestic cats on the landscape facilitate and may actually increase the risk of disease transmission. So what we're doing with managing domestic cats has a big impact, not only for predation of wildlife, but also for disease control as well. All of this kind of boils down to the notion of One Health, which is gaining momentum among the veterinary community, especially the wildlife veterinary community, but also the human health community. I think in light of COVID, this has really sort of taken off as an idea that the health and welfare of domestic animals, wildlife, and people are all interconnected, and we can achieve optimum outcomes in one of those groups by taking steps to elevate the health in another group. So basically, all of this is connected. So there are opportunities moving forward for all of us, each of you, to take action in your community to advance responsible cat ownership and effective unowned cat management. There is the Bird City Network. So if excuse me, your state has a Bird City designation, you can get it's a little confusing. So if there's a Bird City, Washington, I don't know if there is, but if not, might want to look into it. If there's Bird City, Washington, then there can be cities that apply to become a bird city. And to do that, you have to meet certain criteria. There's information about keeping cats indoors as part of that certification process. American Bird Conservancy provides a lot of educational resources that can be distributed by you for free. We have brochures that can be downloaded, or if you want fancy glossy copies, we can provide that to you at cost. You can take the pledge to keep cats indoors. You can be a model of responsible cat behavior in your community. You can also work with local legislators to advance ordinances or state laws that or HOA bylaws, whatever the case may be, that promote responsible cat ownership. Things like I mentioned before, mandatory vaccination and sterilization, and most importantly, keeping a cat on the owner's property. Again, treating cats like we treat dogs, going into where there are dog laws and inserting and cats. It could be that simple. So finally, in review, I just want to say, domestic cats are a non-native predator that have significant impacts in the environment for wildlife and can spread a wide variety of infectious pathogens. So we have to manage domestic cats. We absolutely have to do it. And we need more people to take up the mantle of domestic cat management in their community, to be a voice for reason, for science, for bird conservation, and for the health and welfare of cats as well. And so ultimately, it's not anything that is super revolutionary. It is a minor shift in how we have traditionally viewed domestic cats, but it's just viewing them like we do dogs already. We've already done this with dogs. We've gone from packs of feral dogs in the environment to now every dog is or should be on a leash. We need to do the exact same thing with cats. It's time to treat cats like we treat dogs. So that's it for my presentation. I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions that you might have, and I appreciate your attention.
So do we have any questions for Grant? If you do, I'll bring the microphone to you.
Are you familiar with the TNR acronym?
I am, yeah.
What do you think of it?
So for those who don't know, TNR stands for trap, neuter, release, trap, neuter, return, or trap, neuter, reabandon, depending on who you're talking to. I would fall into the trap, neuter, reabandon camp, as you might guess. So the idea behind TNR is that cats in the environment would be trapped, sterilized, and then put back outside. I have no problem with the trapping and the sterilization. It's that reabandonment into the environment that is problematic. Whether sterilized or not, those cats are going to remain predators in the environment. And unfortunately, the science overwhelmingly has concluded that TNR programs just do not work to reduce cat populations.
Grant, I was curious about the graph that showed that non-native rodent populations increased when cats were around.
Yeah.
Any idea what that's about?
Yeah, I think it's those non-native rodents are used to the type of predation pressure, have evolved I don't want to say strategies, but because of what it implies, but a life history that is more in line with coexisting with domestic cats as opposed to our native predators. Again, domestic cats are an introduced species in North America. They were introduced by people in 1500s, 1600s, something like that. And so that's a relatively short amount of time in evolutionary history. So our native populations are struggling to figure that out.
Grant, did you say that there's a immunization for that toxoplasmosis? That sounds pretty scary.
Yeah, I did not say that. No, there is not an immunization for Toxoplasma gondii, unfortunately. And once you get it, you have it for life. So,
Well,
yeah,
is there
it
a
does sound.
shot to give the cat for it?
No, no. The best thing you can do for minimizing the risk of Toxoplasma gondii exposure is keep your cat indoors. Don't feed it a raw diet. Feed it, processed food or food that's been cooked all the way through. Well done. That's how you can kill the tissue cysts. Also consume food that's been cooked all the way through. Wash your fruits and vegetables. And yeah, and then get rid of domestic cats in the environment. That's the best way to do it. All roads lead back to domestic cats. I mean, I think that's the point to really make here. I'm not trying to be doom and gloom or fear mongering here with toxoplasmosis. It's a really cool disease, which I've said repeatedly. And I don't think we need to be overly frightened of it, but we do need to be aware of the consequences of it. I mean, it is real. It's over 1 million Americans are newly infected with toxoplasmosis every year, I believe. And it is the second leading cause of death among foodborne illnesses. So we need to be mindful of it, but we don't need to necessarily live in fear. But we should take steps to minimize the environmental contamination. And whether you get exposed through eating infected tissues or through a cat pooping in your garden, regardless, all of, that tissue cyst in the livestock comes from a domestic cat or another feline. Without felines, there is no toxoplasmosis.
Hi, Grant. I have a question. We want to use this presentation as a kind of a springboard for our local Audubon chapter to begin a project on keeping cats indoors in our city. And I'm curious if you know of specific cities that have effective cats indoors programs.
Yeah, interesting question. Not really. So there are cities and counties and states, though not as many, that have effective laws in place. Enforcement is always a bit of a challenge, but getting the laws in place is really the first step. But to have a fully fledged program on cats indoors, not so much. I would say, my program is really the only one of its kind in the United States. The Cats Indoors program at American Bird Conservancy. And then I work with coalitions of people around the country, but there's not really a Cats Indoors program in another place. I would say the closest maybe is the Kauai Wildlife Coalition on the island of Kauai in Hawaii. And they're making strides on cats indoors issues there.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to help, work with you though, if that's something you want to get set up. There's been some work in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, but individual sort of chapters of cats indoors in the US, not so much.
Thank you. Yeah, we may take you up on that offer. We did have a question, recommendations for dealing with I couldn't see the chat. Okay, go ahead.
As the question was, do you have a recommendation for dealing with a neighbor that has a stray cat that runs loose?
Yeah. So I think if you've got a cat owner, you're probably, well, let me take a step back. I prefer to use whichever argument I think is going to resonate best with the person I'm speaking to. So if they care about wildlife, we're going to talk about wildlife issues. If they care about human health, we're going to talk about that. But probably as a cat owner, they care about their cat. Now, if they cared more, they might keep it inside. But it's possible that they are just not aware of the various risks that cats are exposed to when they roam outdoors. And so that might be where I would start, talking about the risks to the cat. You might also talk about how that cat roaming on your property is causing you anxiety for one reason or another. Maybe you're allergic to cats, maybe it's pooping in your garden, maybe it's spraying your car or something. You can talk about your personal experience with that cat and how it affects you and ask that person be responsible and keep it on their own property. A domestic cat is considered personal property, and so it's essentially trespassing when that cat roams onto your property. I see there's some response in the chat about Washington state law I was doing a little bit of research in advance of this talk to see, because I'm not familiar with Washington's state laws. I did see one that I thought was interesting, and I need to do more research into it to see how applicable it really is. But under Title 16, Chapter 16.04, there is a trespassing animals statute, and it doesn't say, as far as I could tell, again in my limited reading of it this afternoon, it seems to apply to domestic cats. So if you were to find a domestic cat roaming on your property, you could call the sheriff, if I read it correctly, and the sheriff would be required to come out and get the cat.
One question, Grant, that we have run into, or one issue, is that we have we go out and do tabling, and we talk about cats and among other things. And I remember one person came up to us and said, "Well, we live out in the country, and we have our cats out there. They're barn cats, and we need those cats to kill mice, et cetera, et cetera." So how would you respond to that person?
Well, I start by saying that, while cats might kill some mice, they're not going to kill only mice. They're going to kill a lot of other things. And while that cat might kill some mice, it might also be contributing to some disease transmission risks. So that cat might pick up toxoplasmosis from a mouse. Again, going back to that life cycle where it comes from the cat, goes to another intermediate species, and then goes back to the cat. So the cat can get it from a mouse if it hasn't been infected already. And then the cat can contaminate your barn and wherever with Toxoplasma gondii. I would just say there are actually more effective ways of managing rodents than a cat. Traps are a great way to do that. Native predators are helpful in that regard too. But a domestic cat is like dropping a bomb on something when all you really need is a scalpel. I do not recommend it. It's also not healthy for the cat.
Thank you.
If they use rodenticides anywhere, that cat could die from secondary poisoning.
You were talking about the Washington laws, and one of our Zoom participants, Chris Loggers, has noted that one potential avenue is a WAC that governs domestic animal waste. So just FYI for everyone, whether you're in Zoom land or here in the room.
Out of curiosity, is the transmission to humans mostly as a result of cleaning litter pans, or some other way?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So it takes 2 to 5 days for Toxoplasma gondii to sporulate the oocyst. So that just means it's not infectious until it does that. So if you're cleaning your litter box regularly, and also if you're not feeding your cat undercooked or uncooked food, then there's very little exposure risk. If your cat's staying indoors, very little exposure risk from that animal to you from cleaning the litter box, especially if you're cleaning it regularly. If your cat roams outdoors, however, then that changes things a little bit. And it might increase, it certainly would increase the likelihood of transmission. But you can get it sort of the way the phrasing typically is, the top sources of human infection are eating undercooked meat, which again, ultimately goes back to domestic cats or other felids, but pretty much domestic cats. Or from environmental ingestion or environmental exposure, such as, working in the garden and touching your mouth and a cat's pooped in that garden at some point in the last year. So ingestion of oocysts and tissue cysts are both the top sources of exposure. There have been studies in the United States of multiple, what they call epidemics, and those are from oocysts, I believe, primarily. There was a study in Chicago. There's a National Center for Toxoplasma study in Chicago. and they found, I think it was 78% of mothers who arrived because of congenital toxoplasmosis, that's toxoplasmosis that spreads to the fetus, was a result of oocyst exposure. So that means what was excreted in cat feces.
Grant, I have a question about cat owners who are convinced their cats would never hunt and catch a bird because they're well fed.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that made that cat a super predator because
Yeah.
it's healthy and robust, and it's probably going to nail more birds than an underfed cat. Would you agree?
I would. I mean, cats are individuals, of course. So some might truly go out there and just plop down under a tree and be fat and lazy. But especially younger cats are more likely to be those super predators. Yeah. I mean, anybody who's seen a cat, this is kind of why I make that statement earlier in the talk. Anybody who's seen a cat play with a toy, that's a predatory response. Whether it's a feather toy or a titmouse, it's still a predatory response. The only difference is the titmouse is going to die.
Grant, in your research, have you uncovered common reasons or rationale that cat owners give for why they keep their cats outdoors?
So I will say that the motivations and barriers and sort of the human dimensions, the psychological thought processes associated with this issue are still being researched. I don't think we've really figured it out entirely. There are a variety of different reasons. I think tradition is one of those. Not wanting to change the litter box is another. This misperception that cats need to roam outdoors in order to lead a healthy, fulfilled life is another. Some people think that, and honestly, I'm one of them. And this might go back to that question about how you speak to cat owners. I was one of those cat owners when I was young. We had cats and they were outdoors. And I can remember cheering on our cat going after a northern cardinal nest. And, because I thought it was just natural. I thought this was thinning of the herd, so to speak. And I was just ignorant. I didn't know. I was very biologically minded, sort of a young budding conservationist, but I didn't know. I didn't know enough about invasive species. I didn't know about domestic cats as an invasive species and about all of these various consequences they can have, about bird declines. I just didn't know. So I can relate to that. And I can say, I came to the realization that it's not healthy. It's not healthy for the cat. It's not healthy for wildlife, certainly. It's not good for the community. It does impose trespassing essentially on your neighbors. So there is no reason that your cat needs to roam outdoors. It's at the end of the day, it's irresponsible actually and inconsiderate to the community, whether that be the human community or the wildlife community.
Thank you.
More to come though on that answer. Lots more research to be done.
Thank you, Grant. Really do appreciate the presentation, and we will take you up on your offer to assist in our project here in Spokane.
Yeah, thank you. Please do. I had my contact information at the end of the talk, and it's being recorded. So if you want to check that out, I'll also put it here in the chat if you want to reach out. Would be happy to chat with you more about how we can move this forward. It's a big issue, and we need to do something to get it done.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everybody here in the room for coming, and for you out in our Zoom audience. Thank you also for paying attention and being at the meeting. We will be having an announcement in the next Pygmy Owl about a group of us who have already met at least one time to discuss the issue and strategies. And if anybody else wants to join that group, please let me know. Alan McCoy, you can find my email address. Thank you very much.